Hi, my name is Madison, and in today's video I am going to be talking about why I actually like history. Now, I know history is one of those subjects that a lot of people don't really like while they're in high school, middle school, maybe even into college, but a lot of people actually like history a little bit more as they get older and they're able to learn about history kind of on their own terms and not through a curriculum or what the state wants you to know about it or what your particular professor in history class wanted you to know. So I have always liked history. I have liked history from when I was really little till right now, present day, and I will continue to love history for the foreseeable future. I originally wanted to be a high school history teacher. That was like my main plan, my goal. It's why I went to college. But when I started to take classes for teaching, I realized it was not my cup of tea, not entirely what I wanted to do, at least right now in this part of my life. So maybe sometime in the future I might revisit it, but definitely not right now. I like the idea of being a teacher, but in the real world, it's not something that I really see myself doing in today's world. So I had to change what I was getting my college degree in from secondary education to history. So I graduated with a bachelor's in history. At my college, you really only had to take 5 upper level history courses and 2 mandatory 4,000 level courses, senior level classes, to get your degree, to qualify to have a history degree. And then the rest of your credits would be taken up with your general knowledge courses and electives, which is kind of interesting because a lot of other degrees, like especially when I was getting my education degree, almost your entire college education plan is laid out for you. You just have to pick when you take the classes, and you maybe have like a semester's worth of electives. But with history, I had a lot more electives than I thought I was going to have. So with that, I started to think about if I really wanted to do my own little focus on history, because I have history interests. I enjoy learning about the 19th century, especially American history during the 19th century. There was a lot of stuff going on, and it is all really interesting, and I hope to do a lot of that in my podcast, go over stuff that happened in the 19th century. I also really enjoy the Renaissance time period. I took a lot of classes that pertain to the Renaissance time period, and it's always been something that I enjoyed. And that kind of leans more on the cusp of history and the humanities. So I tried to squeak in a humanities minor, but by December 2020, I was done with school. I did not want to take any more classes. I had enough credits, and I would have needed to take 2 more classes to get my humanities minor, but I wanted to graduate. I had just done 2 semesters online, and I just didn't want to continue doing Zoom college for another semester if I really didn't have to. So I was very close to getting a humanities minor, but I didn't. But I still took quite a few humanities classes. So that is also where some of my background comes from with history. So one of the reasons why I enjoy history is there's actually a little bit of something for everybody. Like I said, my favorite parts of history are 19th century American history, the Renaissance. I also enjoy mid-20th century history. Think post-World War II to the Reagan era, that time period. A lot of stuff also happened there that was really pivotal for where we are today, and I think that's really interesting to learn about. So those are the histories that I am comfortable with. Those are histories that I took multiple classes on, and I feel like I have a good background and like proper education on. I enjoy listening about world history. I haven't really picked up any books and read about it. A lot of the books that I have are books that I had to purchase for my history classes that I've read all the way through and look forward to rereading for episodes of my podcast and taking additional notes on them. And I would like to branch out a little bit more and read about topics that aren't fenced in the 19th century, mid-20th century, Renaissance, Tudor history. I would like to learn more about, I would just like to have a broader knowledge of world history, which is something that I didn't really pursue during college or was really exposed to during high school. A lot of world history consists of Europe, and while Europe has a lot of history, there are also other parts of the world that deserve their histories to be included. I did take a Latin American history course while I was in college, but there was only one professor who taught all of the Latin American history courses, and my learning style didn't really mesh well with the way that she presented her lectures. And I didn't really want to take another class if I knew I wasn't really going to enjoy the way the material was taught. So I only took the one class, and it was great information. I just didn't mesh well with the professor. On the topic of taking history classes in college, you can really only take the classes that they offer. I mean, it makes sense. You can't take a class that the school does not offer. And at my college, they offered a lot of US history classes and a lot of European history classes. There was even one professor who was solely focused on Irish history and Viking history. So those were the classes that were offered to me. The one professor taught the Latin American courses. We had previously had a professor who taught Russian history, and I was really looking forward to taking a class of his, but he retired before I was able to grab a seat in one of his classes, so I did not take any classes with him. But moving on from that, one of the things that I hear about from friends, family, people who I tell that I got a history degree, they always ask, what are you going to do with a history degree? Now, I myself did not really know what I wanted to do with my history degree. I had many appointments with my advisor when I was panicking about what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I did not get a job in the history sphere, like public history. Public history is important, and the people who work in public history are so integral to making sure that people know the history of their local communities and the area where they're from. A lot of them focus on getting oral histories from people, and it's just a really cool profession, but it's also not one that I'm very interested in for myself. I am still learning about myself and what I want to do. I do currently have a managerial job in a retail store. In a perfect world, podcasting would be my job. That is one of my goals, is to have the podcast be my job, and where I can spend my time every week focused on my podcast and reading and researching and producing a show that people tune into and listen and enjoy, and they come out of it having learned something. And with that, that means I have to start from the very beginning, like so many other independent podcasters, and just record an episode, edit it, publish it, and just keep going, releasing constant content. A lot of podcasters recommend having green content, or content that will be sustainable over many years. So not really like current event type of information, because that will be relevant in the present, but in 5 years is what's going on today going to really be what someone wants to listen to. So approaching starting a podcast through the world of history is actually, I feel, quite beneficial. A lot of these history topics are things that people are interested in for long periods of time. So for instance, I'm going to be doing episodes on the Cold War. The Cold War is something that I feel people will be interested in for a little bit longer than, say, the first 6 months after I publish the episode. It could be something that people come back to and listen to and find my podcast from an episode on the Cold War, or episodes on the Cold War. And with that, by having episodes that are big name episodes that people look for, things that people are somewhat familiar with and they feel comfortable, could possibly lead to them scrolling through my feed and finding episodes on things that aren't as common and that they've never heard of before and that they want to listen to. So that is something that I am looking forward to with my podcast, is having different types of history on there, something for everybody, something that you could find 10 years from now and it would still be relevant, because it is something that happened in the past that is still well known in the cultural zeitgeist, especially in the US. So one of the final reasons for why I want to start a history podcast and put myself out there into the world of history is that I feel like there can be more women's voices in the world of history. There's definitely a lot of room for women and people like me to put themselves into the world of history and let their voices be heard. I have noticed, especially while I was in college, that a lot of the classes that were offered were taught mostly by male professors. So I did notice that a lot of my American history classes would definitely be more male heavy than, say, my Renaissance classes. And while I enjoy history, I love it. I love everything there is to do about history. I'm constantly listening to podcasts about history. But I tend to think that we shy away sometimes from the less happy parts of history. Like, yes, we do talk about a lot of things that have happened that are not great. A lot of history is bad. A lot of things have happened in the past that are not great. They have really not been fantastic for a lot of people. But I feel like there's a lot more room to expand on those ideas and really talk about things that aren't talked about as often. So one of my greater inspirations for starting a history podcast would be one of my professors that I did have while I was in college. She taught European history, different time periods, and she had us read these books in her class that were a lot different than books I had read for other classes. They were more personal histories. They showed a snapshot of what life was like for the regular person. One of the books that she had us read was this one. It's called A Woman in Berlin, and it's translated diary entries from a journalist who lived in Germany during the time when the USSR had occupied Berlin. And I will never forget this book. This book, I think about it all the time. I think about this woman's story and what happened to her and all of the sadness and all of the horror that she lived through and witnessed. And I just want to tell people stories that you don't really hear about all that often. And I would recommend this book to anybody. It's called, again, A Woman in Berlin, and it's one of the best books I've ever read, and it's definitely had a lasting impact on me and how I view history. It's kind of changed the way that when I read it, how I saw history. It kind of changed the way that I saw history after I read it, because a lot of times you'll look at history and it's hard to put yourself there. It's hard to kind of picture or try to feel what it would be like to have been there during that time, because we live in a different time than 1940s Germany. It's definitely different, and it is hard to imagine what it would be like to be someone from that time. And this book is literally someone's diary. It's her own personal thoughts about what was going on during this time. And it just really opened my eyes to how history is personal. Like, we're living through history right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And one day, 40 years down the line, kids are going to be learning about this in history class, and they're going to have their own opinions about it. And they'll probably have a hard time placing themselves in our shoes. So it's definitely something that I think about while I am researching about times are different, and viewing something through my eyes is going to be different than how it was viewed during that time period, and how people experience things differently as time goes on. So that is also something that I keep in mind with history. And like I said, while history is great and I enjoy it, there are a lot of parts of history that were really hard for a lot of people. History is often told from the perspective of the winner, and it's also important to recognize that history can only really be told by the people who kept records, or the people whose records weren't destroyed. In short, history is important. I love it. I got my degree in it, and I probably wouldn't get my degree in anything else. I enjoyed my time that I spent in college learning about history, and I am really looking forward to learning more about history and then presenting it to you guys, to anybody who wants to listen to it. So with that, I will see you in the next one. Bye!